every woman is the same. Not every, if you will, especially abled person is the same, so on and so forth. And not every person of color is the same.
The moment where you need to feel safest is in those moments where you are most vulnerable.
So slotting is the other side of rich diversity.
It doesn't have to be a pompous show of these fragmented DEI interventions. It's about bringing the entire ecosystem together.
What role do you think social media plays in shaping perception?
Today, we're going to be talking about a pivotal conversation which hinges on the theme of psychological safety, belonging, and inclusion in the workplace. A theme that really sits deep in the heart of every thriving organization today. This also marks to be the second episode of Tales and Lattes, which is brought to you by the Power Pivot. Through Tales and Lattes, we attempt to bring to fore shared stories, struggles, insights, and more importantly, actionable ideas. And our hope and endeavor through this exercise is that these discussions inspire us all so that we're able to lead our lives, to lead our workplaces with intentionality and build an environment where everyone can truly thrive authentically. Diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, these are words that we hear every now and then. In fact, these are words that we go to our clients with. These are themes that organizations deeply value and are pursuing. But while we were having some of these conversations with our clients, we realized that we first need to go back to the drawing board and understand and establish that none of these can truly exist without psychological safety. That then really becomes the bedrock, allowing every single individual in the ecosystem to feel valued for what are their unique stories, what are their backgrounds, celebrate their wins, their struggles, and all of it put together. Very simply put, psychological safety is nothing but an environment where people feel safe, free from judgment of any sort, free from exclusion of any sort. And that is where we as humans tend to thrive. So today, together, we're very excited that we're going to explore on what is it that it takes to build these environments and how is it that we can ensure every single individual feels seen, heard, valued, and empowered every step of the way. Before we dive into the conversation, we'd like to know a little bit about you and shine the spotlight on each and every one of you in this virtual room. While, with all honesty, we have had one on one conversations with some of you, interacted with some of you on multiple avenues. But for the people who will be tuning into this conversation, we'd like for you to come out and share your unique selves and your unique stories with them. So, whoever would like to go first, I'd invite you to go ahead and share a little bit about yourself.
Maybe I'll kick it off. Thanks, Diksha, and thanks to all my fellow panelists this morning. I think it's wonderful to be here to speak and discuss and learn on a topic that's very close to my heart. So thanks for roping me in. I would say I've been a student of human insight right through my career. Now with TCS in the last couple of years, I've been wearing the hat of a functional HR person focused on culture, leadership. Before that, in consulting. But what keeps me most excited actually is, what moves people. What is it that brings people together? What is it that makes great organizations tick? What is it that sustains what we see as some wonderful performance from some of the organizations that we know and some of the people that we know. So happy to be here, and to share whatever that I might have learned over the last few years, and also, of course, learn from all of you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Ajit. Thanks for getting the ball rolling on that one.
I can go next. Firstly, thank you, to the Power Pivot for shining the light on such an important and pertinent topic in this day and time. My name is Kaumudi Oak, and I'm currently heading the people success function at Bizongo. Bizongo is a fintech startup in the MSME space, and we are trying to digitize the MSME space. It's a very unique setup. it's we see true intersectionality of generations, and it's after spending 2 decades in people advisory roles in multinationals that now I am in a startup, and have had some very good learnings in the last 2 years, which I hope to share in this conversation. So yeah, that's about me. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Thank you so much, Kamadi. Arpita, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you, firstly, the Power Pivot team, for including us in the conversation and sparking a discussion which, I think all of us feel very passionately about. So, indeed, my gratitude on that. I am Arpita, and I'm currently a director at Mercer India, which is in consulting. I've been a career consultant for about 15 odd years in my life, and I've done a lot of my body of work has been in the space of what we call talent organization and culture transformation. So, across the country and across different parts of the world, a lot of what we are going to talk today is what, I've kind of partnered with leaders and more importantly, employees saying that, how can we make organizations and ourselves more thriving? Very deeply passionate and honestly a champion of sorts in this space, such that people feel that they belong before they perform as much as they do. So, yeah, I look forward to our conversation and thank you for having me.
Pratap, if we could invite you to go in next, please.
Yes. First off, thank you very much. Glad to be present amidst wonderful folks. My people functional experience has been incidentally with conglomerates, with the opportunity of working in manufacturing, FMCG, and now healthcare sector. My profile has largely been business partnering, where one key element of it is to coach people leaders. And one of the significant need of the people leaders in this age and generation is to create that psychologically safe environment for their team to thrive and deliver. I am Pratap. I'm currently with Bangalore Corporation. Excited to weigh in on different perspectives.
Thank you so much, Pratap. We're so excited to have each and every one of you with us in this room today. So thank you for being here once again. Vaishnavi, if I could invite you to go in next, please.
Thank you, Diksha. My name is Vaishnavi, and I'm a founding member at the Power Pivot. I'm a talent and DEI consultant with close to a decade's experience. I'm also a twin mom, which I share very proudly as part of my introduction. Inspired by my journey as a mom, I've also embarked on a research project, which I am hoping will manifest in the form of a book on the topic of mothers returning to work post maternity and the transition and how they navigate this. Really excited to be part of the panel and looking forward to an engaging and insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. And the Power Pivot is really excited, elated, and glad to have you on board. So thank you for coming in and joining hands with us. Just by way of a quick introduction, I'm Diksha Khera. I'm the founder of Power Pivot. But it took me multiple career pivots myself, a lot of entrepreneurial stints, some failed, some I'd like to believe successful, and a whole lot of career transitions for me to get here and to be able to carve this body of work for myself, which I'm very, very proud and humbled to call the Power Pivot. I'll maybe start by asking an open question, and any one of you can just feel free to kind of come in here and share with us your perspectives. When you look back at your journey, your professional journey largely, can you think about a pivotal moment, a specific case or point in time when you experienced a sense of psychological safety at your workplace? And what did that really do for you, for how you showed up at work? How did that play out in your work at large? Alternatively, you can also possibly zoom in on a specific time when you did not feel a sense of psychological safety, where you felt the lack of it, and how did that go about impacting you? So, both sides of the coin is what we could look at, maybe delving into before we get started with some of the other aspects of this conversation.
Isha, I can take this one. This was a time few years back when I was exploring a job change. And again, the moment where you need to feel safest is in those moments where you are most vulnerable. So at a leadership level, you're looking for a job change, and there were two conversations going on with two different organizations, and the processes were very different. what I experienced. The recruitment partners in both organizations were very, very involved. They were, very high touch, if I may. And on one side, when the conversation was progressing, and I was meeting, global stakeholders, senior stakeholders, when I would ask that, is there something that I can do to, prep myself for the conversation, etc. One set of tonality was, just be yourself. They said, just be yourself, just be yourself, nothing, just be yourself. And on the other side, before every conversation, there was heavy prepping and grooming in progress, saying that, he's a very important stakeholder. You need to be very well groomed for this meeting. Or, she can come across as being a little cold, but, eventually you all will break the ice. And, somewhere along the path, one conversation was making me feel very safe, making me feel very included, that all I had to do was, be myself. And then the other conversation made it seem like, for a positive outcome, I would have to force fit certain parameters. And then obviously, I chose the conversation which was inclusive and, where I could be myself. And, it really allowed me to shine. So I don't know, maybe, that's an example at the recruiting stage, where folks don't even realize that it's so easy to exclude.
Absolutely. And that's such a relevant theme that you bring to fore with that little share comedy, which is the theme of vulnerability. A lot of times we may not make or create the right environment. And vulnerability in that sense becomes the cornerstone when we talk of themes like psychological safety. And I very strongly believe that when we stop being vulnerable, we just cease to be human. So I think that's a very, very pertinent theme that you bring to fore. Thank you for sharing that. Thanks a lot. Anyone else would like to bring to life their experience?
Thanks, Kumari, for the example. I'll probably give a different experience here. I was in this situation for a brief period of time. For me, what briefly captures this time period is absence or lack of peace of mind in an environment where there is an inherent assumption that there is one better way of doing things. Unknowingly, I strive toward that certain benchmark. Not only did I fail in arriving at the outcome, but I also drained myself through the process because the assumption is put more effort, and you will get to it. When I recollect of the time period that I went through, not only I had some challenges in the professional space, there was a natural impact on the personal life also. For me, it is very tough to imagine someone having a very challenging professional environment, but at the same point of time having a thriving personal space. That would be very tough to imagine. One indicator that I reflect back when I've heard of any of the people leaders that I partnered with is to say, go and check if you are committing or if your team member is committing too many basic mistakes. There's a good chance that someone is committing small or multiple gaps in an area which they otherwise do well, and likely they are not experiencing psychological safety.
That's an interesting spin to it. While I would have liked to believe that if people are making mistakes, as long as they're owning up their mistakes, that environment is safe enough. But I'm sure through the rest of the conversation, we'll definitely double click on that aspect, Pratap, that you bring to fore. And I think another point is when we tend to put people in a box and we just assume that that box is the ultimate version and definition of who we are and how we ought to show up at work. So thank you for sharing that. Arpita, I believe you were meaning to come in here.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for kind of referencing the point on one, vulnerability, and two, not putting people in box. So one of my experiences of when someone held space for me in my moments of vulnerability is, so we're in consulting and often we are doing very high stake assignments, and often everything is urgent as on yesterday, when in reality it may or may not be. Some of us in the room already know what I'm alluding to. And one such assignment we were doing very recently, about a year and a half ago, was with the board of a growing IT services organization, and we had to present some of our very key findings. And the CEO was deeply invested in the conversation. Of course, he had a point of view. We had differing point of views. And while he was open to us to come and challenge the point of views, but he wanted us to point it in a manner that's palatable. And there was a lot of pressure. The team was overworked. Everybody was overnight working. And it led to a point that the meeting, of course, did not go very well. And, one of those moments when you have a meltdown moment, I had one such moment. My team was looking at me saying, "Oh my God, what's happening?" I called my manager and I said that I don't know what's happening and I don't know why things aren't working out. What can we do differently? And my manager in that time, he said to me that, it doesn't matter what transpired, it doesn't matter what, how things could have been done differently. What matters is your peace and your well being, and what matters is the team's well being. For now, we'll figure it out from here. But I've made such mistakes in the past as well, or we've had such conversations in the past with other clients. It never goes through it is never down and out. It always comes back. So, it's okay. We learn and we move on. And I will forever remember and I will always quote it because it made me feel so safe that, despite whatever can go wrong, there is your leaders hold space for you, and your leaders actually believe in the intention that you're putting in everything and have that trust. Safety doesn't come by being vulnerable alone. It also comes because we know we can trust and someone trusts us in full faith in return. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all of you to have bared your heart out and shared some of these experiences. I strongly believe that for us to learn as individuals, there's one that we learn from theoretical frameworks, from the theory behind it, from the person who's coined the term, from how Google came into and kind of explained psychological safety and it was coined, and then is lived experiences that some of you have already brought to the fore. So thank you for shining spotlight on that. Ajit, anything that you'd like to add in this space?
Sure, I think I was listening very keenly to what Pratap, Kaumudi, Arpita was sharing, and could sort of relate many more sort of instances apart from what I had thought about. But the one thing that stands out for me is actually at my first job after B school. You're entering this huge world of corporate India. You kind of like, you obviously have your ideals, but at the same time, you're a bit lost and not sure, you're tentative, right? And I distinctly remember my first workplace, particularly my first boss, really doing a set of things which made me feel at home, literally, so, and if I were to sort of, summarize that, right, there are three, four things that happen. One is you have to feel seen, right? As a small kid literally walking the corridors, if you feel that, hey, people are seeing you, you're not just a poster on the wall, not a blind spot, right? It starts there. Second is the fact that you're included. So being seen, being included, which means you're roped into things, you're part of meetings, maybe you're just listening, that's okay, right? At the first job, you're there. And then when it takes off after that, in terms of being sort of respected, right? You're respected for some things that you're doing, and best case when you're celebrated, so I see that as a continuum, right? Being seen, being included, being respected, being celebrated. I think all of this happened with me in my very first 6 months at the workplace, right? And for me, those are priceless learnings that I've carried with me, even as I transition to being a manager, leader, to really say that how do you drive this? How do you sort of create that environment for your people? And that remains fresh. It's 24, 23 and a half, 24 years now, and I tell this tale everywhere, and happy to do that here as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Ajit. And I'd just like to maybe build the conversation further while we've had you share one of your early experiences in life and how you saw psychological safety come to life in that environment. You've been a tenured leader, you've spent some time in consulting, you've been in the industry. How have you been really building and fostering that environment of not just psychological safety, but also an environment where inclusion and sense of belonging are key tenets within your team? What, in your experience, really brings these to life?
Yeah, so I'll answer that in two parts, Diksha, if I may.
Sure.
One, let me wear the hat of what we are doing a bit at TCS, right? And what have we been focused on? And two, then bring in a bit of my own element into it in terms of what guides my thought process, which is very much aligned to how TCS drives it. So at TCS, inclusion is really, as widespread and cultural, riding on the ethos of the group itself. And we do a few things, if I were to summarize that, I think it's It's a combination of representation, which means that you are bringing in as wide a representation of the community and the societies that we sort of inhabit into play into the workplace, enabling them through policy, infrastructure, creating the right ecosystem. And that's where the rubber hits the road, right? The culture of inclusion, awareness, sensitization, all of that. There are multiple avenues in terms of engagement, which means that through employee resource groups, varied in definition. Maybe it's expecting mothers, it's early families, it could be differently abled folks. How do you create communities? And most importantly, we also back all of this up with development, right? Which means it doesn't sit at a community level. And we've been doing this since 2009 actively as a culture, of course, much before that. And our focus continues to be how do we align it to business, which means that the sense of driving innovation, creativity, aligning to strategy, all of that also happens, while we do this. So it's not something that's sitting outside of that realm. If I bring in a bit of my own thought processes into it, I would say one is what I described as my own first job and what I learned from there. But some things that I've kind of picked up also on the way. The sense of openness and transparency that you're able to bring into play. Staying curious about people, right? What really drives them, what makes them tick, and staying open to whatever comes your way, right? That's I think very, very important. Leveraging strengths that you can see, right? And that just ensures that you are bringing the full force of the team, the network, the collaborative possibilities into the picture. How do you look at positive alternatives? Which means that, and Arpita sort of brought that in beautifully. Her own example, her own vulnerability, and how her manager sort of was able to look at what is the possibility in that situation now that something has happened, right? I mean, that's a brilliant sort of stance to take in everything that happens. And then holding the agenda, as I call it. I think one of the key factors that comes in the way of really living inclusion is actually the fact that you're not blending it in with what you have to do, with what you have to deliver, right? You're seeing this as a bit of a separate special project. It doesn't work that way, which means that leaders and managers have to kind of own it up. You cannot fake this, right? People see through this. So that's broadly what I follow, Diksha. I don't know. I know I might have rambled a bit towards the latter part, but this is what I truly believe in.
No, and I think it was a very good blend in of organizational and systemic interventions. And what is your point of view and your thought process around some of these things? And Ajit, the interesting part is that while you were talking about some of these, to my mind, it felt like, oh, this is so easy. I mean, this is so doable. Why then are we really struggling with it? Because I mean, most of these things, when you just simplify it and when you put it into micro steps like these, they seem very doable. But the fact is that we're still struggling with the reality of how safe we feel at our workplaces. But thank you for bringing that to fore. Comedy bases our last few conversations as well. I felt it was an opportune time for us to bring you into the conversation. Now, we all know that workplaces are, just purely by way of the country that we operate in, which is India. Workplaces are fairly diverse when it comes to ethnic diversity, when it comes to language diversity. People from different socioeconomic backgrounds come in, genders come in, especially able people. I mean, there's the works of how different people from different backgrounds come together to make one unified workplace. What, in your view, then, are some of those easy to do, simple steps that can be taken that each of these employees, who may be very distinct, very different in their backgrounds and in who they are, but they still feel as valued and as belonged and as encouraged to really just raise their hand, share their perspectives, be the voice that they want to be?
So pertinent question, Diksha. And I'll build upon where Ajit left off. I think he brought to fore a very important thought process, which is the fact that diversity and inclusion can't be a project. It has to be a way of life. It has to get tethered into the fabric of the organization. And what the approach that I have seen, which works well through my cumulative experience, is really thinking about it as an ecosystem. It's an ecosystem play. It's not about doing things in isolation. And I think, the more as organizations we can think about tethering throughout the entire, I would say, recruit to exit process, and hand holding moments that matter. So I'll give you some examples. Typically I would say, as leaders in the organization, and again, I'm saying leaders, not, it's not about, whether you're a people leader or you're a business leader or financial leaders in the organization. We have to be mindful of our policies, our processes, our practices, and the workplace, and finally the people. These are the five key things that, are part of this very, very important ecosystem. Now, they all have to work together, because if you put together a policy, which says that, you'll have family caregiver leave. So Bizongo has a family caregiver leave where you don't have to take leave from your sick leave or annual leave. If you have a family member who's unwell, even a pet, you can take family caregiver leave. Now this wonderful policy is there. But if the manager, when somebody's taking the policy, says, oh, again your child is sick, the link breaks. So you've put together a policy, but the people and the practice, haven't sort of held it through. So I would say you have to tether it through the entire ecosystem. One of the wonderful things, which I've seen in my experience, in the multinationals as well as Bizongo, is when policies change. That's again a moment that matters. Get folks in. So we do what's called a policy refresh. So we get people in, and the first time I thought, who's going to come in and contribute to an HR policy change? But people came by the dozens to say, this will work or that will work. Ultimately, you take your decision. So I'll give you an example. We were launching a IVF benefit. So we wanted to sort of normalize the conversation on IVF, fertility, egg freezing, and we were about to launch a big scale investment in Bizongo of, reimbursing these treatments. And we did a policy refresh, and women came in and, they spoke up and they said that, hey, it's not just about the monetary benefit. What about leaves? Because, if you have to undergo a fertility treatment, then you need additional leave. And then if that fertility treatment is positive, then your leave is, all your leaves you have exhausted by the time you're, pregnant or for the maternity. So coming out of the listening post, which we had with our very own people, we said not only will we contribute towards, a reimbursement for IVF, we also introduce 5 days of leave for IVF. So they could take it and not have to, go for a special approval, not have to. So again, it's an example of how participating, with your audience, participating with, your co-workers, your teammates can help listen to their voices and include it. Like one of the other things, which is a very small thing, a practice now that we do is we give a exit gift. See, everybody gives an onboarding gift, because you want to please somebody who's onboarding. But, in today's day and age, your association with the brand, your association with the feel good factor continues even after, the employment sort of ends, right? And the conversation also continues. It continues on Glassdoor, Ambition Box, what you may. So we actually introduced an exit gift because we felt that that was a time again when folks were most vulnerable. They felt that, oh, we're being looked at differently, or we're not being heard. So I think again, it's about, these sort of micro steps that you can take, which sort of ensure that, everybody sort of has a voice at the table that you're hearing. See, in the people practice, right, we focus a lot on engagement, and all, a lot of time we spend in engaging. So we'll have events, we'll have festivals, we'll have employee resource groups. What we've done differently is we've handed the trust back to the co-workers. We've said that, if you want to get a group of like-minded people together, every quarter we dedicate a certain amount of money or spend, and folks come in and form their own groups. So we have a doodlers group, we have a dance group. So we don't want to superimpose that, oh, is everyone going to play cricket? Because, a lot of times folks say that not everybody likes cricket. We want to have a different league. So again, it's another mechanism. So you do your common minimum, but give some control back as well. And I think it's a compounding effect. I think it's a compounding effect. When you do this year after year, there are hits and misses, I would say. Like the initial example I gave, where the leave and then the manager, sort of dealings and says, again, it's happening. But I think, as a body, your efforts are recognized and you can move the flywheel forward, which is all that we can aspire to do.
Right. No, absolutely. And You make a very, very important point here, which is also something that Vaishnavi and I discovered very early on in our journey with Power Pivot while we were doing a focus group discussion. We have a maternity comeback program. So we were talking to women who are in organizations but returning back from their maternity. We were talking with a few who had just gone through that transition. And what we heard was there are policies, there are enablement programs, everything is there. But what do we say when we come back to our workplace and our colleagues ask us, so how was your holiday? Or how was your leave? Because we were not on a holiday, we were not on a leave. We were tending to one of the most critical transitions in a woman's life in that sense, or in a family scenario in that sense. So yes, there can be policies, there can be systemic interventions, there can be structural tenets that we can put in place. But until the entire ecosystem kind of weaves in and comes in for that story, I think it's going to be futile.
And I'll add to this, if I may, Diksha. In my
Sure.
tenure as a people advisor, I have always seen a trend of paternity leave being underutilized.
Yeah.
It's a throughout my
Interesting.
career trend. It's a throughout my career trend that maternity leave will sort of get utilized and folks will ask for more leave. But even in organizations that will offer 1 month paternity leave in multiple tranches. When you look back, so I think that the conversation has to get normalized over there as well. Because when we are bringing about change for, I think, our gender diverse colleagues, I think it has to be brought about at both ends of the spectrum, because what we have to advocate is for a better sharing of the load at both ends. So I just wanted to sort of round that thought up.
Absolutely. In fact, Vaishnavi and I are toying with the idea already because of what we hear. Women have come back to us in our cohorts and said, we're doing so much work with women, enabling women. What about the men in the ecosystem? So we're like, let's not make it men versus women. But yes, enablement is as important on the other end of the spectrum as well. And that's how equitably we can work towards solving some of these problems.
In
Vaishnavi,
fact,
is there
that
something?
brings me
Yeah.
Yeah, that brings me to the next question, which is around addressing unconscious bias. Because, we also spoke about lived experience that, again, I'm going back to motherhood because that's something I've recently experienced. That unless you experience it yourself, you don't really understand what it entails or what is the transition. So, many of us might have similar biases and prejudices about other folks from underrepresented communities. So, how do we address that? How do we address unconscious bias? Kaumudi, Arpita, anybody? I mean, happy to hear from you about some steps that have been taken in your organizations.
So I'll go on this one maybe. Um, you know, while Ajit, Kaumudi, Pratap were talking about, the entire journey on inclusion, one of the things that I've always felt, experienced, and often say is that one of the biggest suicide killers to inclusion is the like me bias. That I don't feel, I will not inadvertently include if you're not like me. Now, that like me has a very vast continuum, either the way we look, the way we talk, our backgrounds, similar backgrounds, with the financial, commercial, social, ecological, etc. So, it's just so pervasive, right? That we often are, of course, this it's possibly the biggest window in the Johari window uncovered. So, in terms to your question, Vaishnavi, as to how do we, intentionally manage biases, I think in our experience of both the work that I've done in my career as a people advisor, talent advisor, as well as myself as a leader, right? One of the first thing that becomes very critical in terms of enablement is the sensitization that such a bias exists. And if it were to exist, what that like me for myself stands to be, right? Is it the way I look? Is it the way I talk? I realized through one of my leadership development experiences that my bias was the way people talk. Like, I want to be, my team at that point was surrounded by people who are very eloquent, right? For example. And therefore, and of course, all of us have multiple such similar biases. And to me, that was a very revelatory experience because I would take a lot of pride almost to say that, I love to have a diverse team, but a diverse team that is like me is more like it. So, yes, creating that, if you will, sensitization to say, yes, there are biases. And honestly, at a certain point, it is okay to have the biases till the time you know that you want to solve for it, because it's not because it's a good thing to do, but because it legit has outcomes that we would want to care for, right? So in that organization, both my leaders, the organization, both worked to a uncover that bias with me, b then work with me to say why should we care for it. As leaders, it was a group of very fast tracked career leaders. All of us were sit down and made to understand why it matters. And therefore, what can we do to work about it? Today, for example, my team would have all kinds of employees or my team members, as well as my peers, right? And of course, an intentional set of choices to recruit for differently, seek different profiles, as well as have different formats of meetings, which are more actionable, tactical ways, right? Such that if there is a natural preference for eloquent people, the format shouldn't on top of it enable just that, right? So some of those tactically have helped me both stay true to the cause, as well as stay true to the people. In fact, similarly for an organization, the way we socialize tells a lot about our biases. This was an organization where less than 10% of the leadership was in women, the rest were men. The major places where decisions were taken were on either there were smoke breaks or they were, my typical alcohol parties. And those were all held after 9 p.m. or 8 p.m. of sorts. Working mothers weren't able to join them. Women with caregiving responsibilities weren't able to join them. Non indulgent women, I make this a gender conversation now, or even non indulgent men weren't able to join them. We didn't have data to say if the leadership position had people who weren't smokers, who weren't people who were not engaging in alcohol, but chances are they were. Right. So the way we socialize also tells a lot about our biases. Of course, we worked with the clients, with the company extensively to change the informal means of engagement, such that what we call feeling included, feeling belonged is literally weaved into the thread of the organization more than the structure, the systems, and the policies. In fact, very strongly resonated, Kamadi, with what you said. How much is the uptake on my paternity leaves? Right, and what's the repercussion when I am extending my paternity leaves? How many do, and what's the repercussion on a bunch of things? Equity of pay, performance, all of those are different conversations. We'll pick them up, but yeah.
I'd like to come in here and just build on what Apita and Komati have, I think, detailed out very beautifully, brought in a very relevant aspect. One of the things that I encountered not so long ago in the past was landing up at one of these forums, industry forums, and someone introducing me as saying that I'm coming from Kochi, whereas I'm based in Mumbai, right? And it didn't stop there. So it kind of went from Ajit Nair from Kochi, and then I said, no, I'm not from Kochi. And before I could say I'm from Mumbai, he said, oh, Bangalore. So there was just a set of assumptions being made, and I realized, and that made me reflect as to, this is the so-called upside and downside of being in such a diverse country, but at the same time, just the fact that there is so much diversity, which means that, neurally we are always looking to slot, because that's how we work with things, right? So slotting is the other side of rich diversity, right? So that's something that I kind of was very amusing, but at the same time insightful when I thought about it, saying, why does this happen? That was one part of it. The other thing that I want to bring into the conversation, is the fact that the ability to sort of reflect and step back and say, hey, was that the best way to deliver that message? Did everyone in the room really feel heard, included, right? Sometimes the terms that we use, the language that we bring in, and how we sort of construct things out, there is a certain leaning, right? And that then tends to play out. It becomes systemic, and that's where it starts. And typically, as leaders, we've got to be a lot more conscious of how we are doing that. And is our language inclusive? Is our stance inclusive? Is how we are constructing thoughts and arguments and really putting forth certain points across, is that inclusive, right? And then, of course, be fiercely conscious of who's not in the room, and where are they at. It's very important, very, very important, right? So I think that's something that, I wanted to add in more from a leader behavior perspective, and how we sort of build that in very consciously into how we drive or work with that sense of unconscious bias, minimize it is the way I would say it. It never goes away.
I think, Ajit, what you've said really resonated with me. The part about, being mindful of who's not in the room, and just extending that, what one of my erstwhile managers used to do very beautifully is also try and see who is in the room, but who's not, lending a voice. So if you're taking a high stakes decision and there's a meeting going on, and somebody is not speaking up, in a very mindful way, he would say that, hey, Vaishnavi, you've been silent throughout the meeting. What's on your mind? Like, are we missing something? And the other thing that he would also do very beautifully is if everybody has quickly come to a consensus. So saying that, so again, building, on what we were just discussing a couple of minutes back, what Arpita said, that the like me, that we've all worked together, we are all looking at this problem statement through the same lens, and quickly we have agreed. Have we agreed too quickly? Have we missed something? Have we excluded a voice which is not in the room? So I think, these are all things which help in the journey.
Absolutely. And thank you for summing it up so beautifully, Arpita, Ajit, and Kaumudi. Pratap, is there anything that you'd like to talk about when it comes to unconscious biases, your rendezvous with some of these in your journey thus far, and ways and means by which you think these can be mitigated at workplaces?
Sure, Diksha. Just to share an example that Danhar Corporation that I'm associated with follows. The organization invests on unconscious bias through awareness. The program is called Day of Understanding. So it's an organization-driven initiative. All the leaders, starting with the CEO, have a session with their direct reportees to run this particular session where there will be videos, there will be topic. You would have people representing that particular background or experience in coming on board. But while it's a telecast and you will play it out for some time, there is space in the DOU session to say, now let's discuss, let's reflect. So these sessions are done by all leaders with 18 members. And from an organization point of view, I don't have the data, but I'm sure I can say the time that is invested, it's an organizational time, right? The energy and the leadership involvement in this speaks volume, and it is done consistently. It is not done just because an incident happened somewhere, but it's done year after year, and multiple teams are covered. That I think builds the organization and creates awareness on many unconscious bias.
Great. Thank you so much, Pratap. I think if I were to summarize what we just went through thus far in the conversation, a couple of things definitely stay back with me. One, it doesn't have to be a pompous show of these fragmented DEI interventions. It's about bringing the entire ecosystem together. Second is about intentionality and mindfulness in our choices, in our communication, in our decisions, in just our way of being. And third, I think, is following it up with hardcore actions. When your policies become programs, there is a practice that is followed on ground, which is what gets the translation or that journey covered. So how do we really talk about those actionables, those micro steps that we all have to do to walk the talk every single day? I think that was a very insightful piece on our journey so far, on how we've seen biases, how we've seen workplaces show up when it comes to psychological safety. I think as I look at it, where we are in the conversation, I definitely want to understand and double click on one aspect, which is that so far we've spoken about how do we lend people the window to really raise their hand up or to amplify their voices. But if we were to take this a notch above and say, how do we as organizations really begin to celebrate this intersectionality of diversity that we have? And how do we really reinforce that this intersectionality is meant to serve for the organization with respect to the goals that we've set up, the culture that we want to build? How do you think that celebration can come in with respect to where we are currently in this journey? And I'm willing for any one of you to kind of take the stage and share your thoughts on it, if any.
I just thought I'll share some thoughts. So, for the longest, we've kind of worked as institutional setups to define what we mean by diversity, right? And of course, a lot of it has been in Indian context, gender, in global context, race, and of course, a certain set of LGBTQ, PWD, etc. And very recently, of course, once we've kind of moved the needle on some of these unidimensional realities is when intersectionality came in, right? Which is to say, not every woman is the same. Not every, if you will, specially abled person is the same, so on and so forth. And not every person of color is the same. So, when we talked about celebrating intersectionality and that it matters and that it makes a difference, I've seen that in itself is a very, if you will, steep realization by organizations to one, accept, and B, then create systems to enable, systems to track, and systems to then report back, right? So, to your question, Diksha, right, there are two ways of seeing typically organizations, and then I'll come to the individual leaders aspect, kind of celebrate intersectionality. One is, of course, being very intentional about that representation, right? And we've discussed a lot in some detail about how we've seen organizations do it, how we, of course, also partner with organizations to make that intentional choice on intersectionality of representation. But it needs to go a little higher to say representation on roles, on areas that matter, not, of course, just tokenism. But once you've been able to do that, and in fact, I've seen even before companies put that, there's always a question on why do, why do we need to do this? Why is this important? All of this, while it was women, now we're talking about women of color, now we're talking about women of color in leadership roles. So, of course, there's multiple layers that kind of start peeling the onion through. But some organizations, and this is where I'll maybe talk a little more hard examples of what we've seen in the industry. Some organizations have taken this a step beyond and said, you know what, I'm not going to tell you that it is important. I'm going to show it to you that it makes a difference. So, on a certain periodic basis, coming back and saying that teams that are truly diverse on intersectionality have outperformed teams that are just diverse, right? Now, one may say that it's a very almost a clinical way of establishing legitimacy, but it does make a lot of difference for even the most cynical person to take it up from a very, kind of institutionalizing why it matters. The other thing in terms of celebrating that intersectionality, whether that's of, demographic representation, or I would go ahead, take it a step ahead and say psychographic representation, which is women of color that are maybe, let's say, more assertive than otherwise, or women of color that aren't as assertive as otherwise, similarly, so on and so forth. Having these, so in multiple companies, we've seen there are leadership stories where a journey of such an individual in the organization is talked to, and it doesn't need to be an award, it doesn't need to be a forum. It's just a constant channel of communication where each story is brought up to say, A, that these people exist, B, that these people thrive, right? When we are able to kind of show both the number behind it as well as the journey and kind of humanize the journey, it resonates, of course, far more than just saying that it matters. So, yeah, some things that I've seen happen.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that, Arpita. Anything from you, Komadi, Ajit, Pratap, on this one?
So I'd like to just quickly add in that at a very functional level as TCS, we are building this entire powerful network. And it's not just a network, it's actually a pipeline of women leaders consciously built towards technology and architecture. That was one area where, so two problems to solve for, right? One is to keep the pipeline healthy in terms of women leadership, which is work in progress, right? Which is it continues to be a strong focus area for us. But more than that, the entire STEM area and how do we ensure that we have women leaders in the area of technology and architecture, right? That is something that. So just building on what Arpita said, which is the thematics of it at the same time, the groups of interest, converging that and doing it in a business aligned manner. Because one of the things that we've realized in our ecosystem very, very strongly is the fact that women leaders are really driving a lot of women aspirations, right? So we're creating this thriving community of women leaders. And when they bring in that entire heft of technology and architecture and leaders who are therefore able to talk digital transformation, future, cloud, cyber, whatever it is, with some of the largest organizations that we work with, right? It creates a very different sort of impact, right? So at the one level, we talk about micro behaviors, but on the other side, there's nothing better than showcasing impact, nothing better than showing that, hey, these are our women leaders who are really driving this transformation, so that's something that we working at all the time, and we're seeing some very, very strong results as well, both at an impact level, but at the same time also at a sign up level, where we have women leaders in the pipeline, emerging leaders putting their hand up saying, hey, I want to speak to XYZ, I want to be part of this program. and that's what you really want to see, right? When we talk about ecosystems.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, Ajit. Vaishnavi, is there something you wanted to add in here?
Yeah, I just wanted to bring in Pratap here. Pratap, any practical tips that you'd like to share based on your experience at your current or previous organization on what can be done to foster psychological safety?
From a psychological safety perspective, what we have seen being done is recommending one-over-one conversations. Many times leaders mix with their teams. And generally, the appreciation of what is happening in the team to the leadership is less. While you will expect your people leader to do everything required in the best manner, it's also important to have that visibility so that the course correction happens appropriately. Leader is interested to ensure across the organization we are building it rather than in pockets. So recommending one-over-ones at certain intervals, and these happen typically when the leaders visit that particular geography or even other ways, and they get a sense of how things are happening. Second, we've also seen is a conscious effort to give a reasonable time to Q&A, which is to say, let's say there's a town hall, right? Where there's a cascade of communication that happens rather than a mere 5 minutes just before we close the conversation, but to devote a reasonable time and then to appreciate and have a look out for what kind of questions are being asked, right? Who is asking those questions? And to be very mindful and respectful of the questions being asked, even if they are basic or probably very foundational in nature. Those are ways in which psychological safe space has been created.
Thanks, Pratap, for those inputs. Are there any measures that you use to measure this from time to time and track success?
So two aspects, one from a leader perspective, second from an organization perspective. From a leader perspective, we all are aware about anonymous employee surveys. They are still relevant, but rather than being lost in the significant quantified data that is generally available, but to have a laser focus on something like, let's say, net promoter score. Are the employees vouching for the organization they are part of, the team part of, to their friends and family? It's in itself a good indication of the pride that they have and the confidence that they feel comfortable in the place they operate in. Also recommended to the leaders is those who go out, not just to boast that they have got a very high score on employee surveys, but to say that, hey, this time I really didn't fare well. My feedback from the team is poor, but I am committed to make an improvement and I'm looking forward for your inputs so that we together create an action. From an organization perspective, two more options. One, rather than typically relying to the hierarchical inputs, you have forums like ARG. These are neutral communities. They go out to the associates, separately anchor focus group discussion on a particular theme because they are creating programs. But because these ARGs connect with a wide variety of population for multiple occasions, they end up capturing certain new nuances which might not have really reached the leadership. Those are insights about your organization which your natural hierarchy hasn't provided you with. So surveys are good, but these insights which a neutral forum, because of a different purpose, is able to capture and share are very wonderful insights. I've also heard organizations looking at ex-employees returning back to the organization. That itself is a good indication if you are able to track either the people joining or people who are expressing interest to join back is a significant confidence to the leadership of the place that they have built.
Thanks, Pratap. In fact, when you brought the point of ex-employees, one of the questions that brings me to the next question in mind, which is forums online, right? We have Glassdoor, Ambition Box. So whether we know it or not, we're already building that reputation in online communities about whether we foster psychological safety and inclusion. And I think in today's day of social media, advocacy, what role do you think social media plays in shaping perception and how important is it? Do organizations have, do they do anything to manage this? Are they reading what is published? Are they acting on that? Because that's also feedback, right? So any experiences, insights from any one of you?
I can take this one, Vaishnavi. So I would say that it's a listening post, like any other listening post, that we need to sort of manage and understand what is happening internally in any organization. There are multiple listening posts. You have your focus groups, you have your surveys. Personally, I am not a very big fan of surveys because I think the survey is just as good as the methodology that you use to deliver it. So, I mean, you can do, a one-time employee experience survey, but there are organizations that will exclude the resigned employees or exclude, those that are just like less than 90 days in the organization. So I think the survey is only as good as, the methodology that you deploy. Or, we'll see a very good candidate experience survey. But hey, you've only surveyed the candidates you've made offers to. You've not surveyed the candidates that you put through 16 rounds of interviews, 10 rounds of global interviews, and then declined. So I would say that, when, to Ajit's point that we opened this conversation with, right, that what's your desire as an individual from, like, your infancy stage, right? Is a desire to be seen, is the desire to be heard. It's the very base foundation of the pyramid, right? So why would, a disgruntled employee go and post on Glassdoor or Ambition Box? Because your exit survey was administered while they were still serving their notice period. If you administered your exit survey to them on their personal email address, after made a phone call, try to understand, maybe I'm not saying, that it'll avoid 100% of the trolling, but maybe you'll be able to manage it, and you learn a few things along the way, about what's happening in your own organization. So I would say, a lot of it is to do with being humane, being humble, being vulnerable yourself as an organization, as a leadership team, as a leader, and saying that, there are things that we may not get right, all the time, but the idea is to move ahead and reduce the impact as much as possible. So I think, the feedback loops that you have are very important.
If I may add in, one of the things that we've been focused on at TCS across our 600,000 plus employees is assimilation and inculcation of a lot of our youngsters who've joined us in the last 4 years into the TCS way. And we're doing this to begin with through a very large scale values campaign. And one of the core tenets of this campaign is dialoguing, is ensuring that, our leaders, our managers, enabled by HR, are really reaching out and storytelling, and through storytelling, there is a very large scale engagement that is happening as we speak. In fact, yesterday I was in Ahmedabad, part of one such session, and the entire premise is based on listening and sharing, right? And one of our core values is actually learning and sharing at TCS, right? So we've kind of really, in that sense, it's a sort of a double loop where the values campaign itself is happening, and it's building on one of the values very strongly. Of course, it's building on all the other values as well, right? But I agree with what Kaumudi mentioned, which is the intent with which the listening happens, right, is very, very important. And which also means that with all the noise that social media tends to generate, I call it the headline effect, right? Everything is a headline effect. Nobody's double clicking and reading through anything or listening through anything, understanding the nuance is dead, just to be provocative, right? But organizations, I think, are the smarter ones, at least, are understanding the nuance, getting the essence of what is being said, and accordingly then going back and taking the right action, right? And they are actually, again, to add to what Kamudi mentioned, they are actually looking at communities, right? Which means it's not just about my associates and my employees. It's also about how am I seen by the ones who probably didn't make it this time, by the ones who left me and went away, etc. So I think that perspective, which essentially is inclusion to begin with, right? It is inclusive to begin with by definition, is very powerful. And I think it brings a certain sense of sustainability, therefore, to your actions, how you're really acting on things, and whether you align to what your communities really want you to do.
Absolutely. Very powerful. Arpita, you wanted to come in here.
I wanted to comment with 2 points. One, I wanted to
Sure.
just acknowledge the amazing work on values that you're doing in the organization, Ajit. Sounds very, enlivening and very inspiring. And the second thing I want to talk about, that the question that Vaishnavi was asking, and maybe build up on what Kamadi and Ajit mentioned, that the sincerity with which social media inputs organizations are taking, and where are they taking it? In a body of work of articulating the employee value proposition, just to give you an example, right? For the longest, EVP was what we were good at, and we would do it for everyone the same way. It's no more that way. In fact, over the last few years, and as we speak now, given that employees themselves have so many different personas, right? And I don't mean personas at a demographic level, I mean it at all different quote unquote intersectionalities, as one could think of. Companies, organizations today care about what employees both current, ex, and even potential ones, right? Who have not interfaced with me as an employer, but I've had a friend of theirs who's interfaced, who's worked there, and therefore have a, if you will, a second level experience of who I could be, are also talking on social media. Oh, XYZ place has a toxic work culture, or XYZ place leader is amazing. I'd like to be there. All of that essentially has a ripple effect. And when we craft and organizations today are saying, come and make me relevant today, help me stay relevant. Relevant for whom and for what is a great question. And that's where I've seen an extreme, one of a great point is not just to discredit social media, but to give it the fact that once you double click on it, past the headline effect, as Ajit mentioned, there is some story that's getting brewed there. As much as you may want to close your eyes, the truth is that people are experiencing you and talking about it without sanction on social media, for example. And clients and organizations now are coming to us and saying, help me craft an EVP where you've understood what those people are saying. How much can I be relevant to them? And what choices do I make to either be relevant to them or not? Right. But I want to nonetheless hear and, have it systematically kind of roped in into the experiences that I provide to my employees, the offerings that I give to my employees, and the offerings that I choose not to give to my employees for, of course, my own choices. So it is increasingly becoming a very important lever, if you will, for employees to both intentionally manage how they come across to current as well as potential employees, as well as make changes if needed to that end.
Great. Thank you so very much. And I think I do realize that there has been some bit of diversion. We did not stick to the script at all. And I'm glad that we did not. Like we discussed when we just met up, getting to know each other for the roundtable. Like I mentioned, the only one thought with which Vaishnavi and I come together to bring this to life is that we want this to be a breezy, organic conversation. And I was just so elated to see all parts of that come to life. And thanks to each and every one of you to help us do that. We're at a point in time in the conversation now where we've spoken social media, we've spoken headline, we've spoken what next. So before we jump into our rapid fire, here's a little ask that I have from each one of you. We all know about the 1 minute reels on social media, right? So, bearing that in mind, we'd like you all to talk to us about two practical strategies that you think leaders can not just ideate, curate, but also apply to ensure psychological safety, belongingness, and equitable ecosystem become a living reality for all of us. So take a moment, gather your thoughts, and we'd be happy to spotlight whoever wants to go first. And don't worry, we're not going to hold you accountable to the 60-second reel. That was just to build a good segue between what we spoke about and what comes in next.
Maybe I'll take a stab first.
Sure.
I think leaders need to be eternally curious because curiosity is what leads you to really wonder a bit more, understand a bit more, right? So it is work in progress all the time. And I think in the manifest forms that we see around us in the world, people are evolving and people are evolving around multiple dimensions. So curiosity is the one answer that I would talk about. And then, of course, link that up very consciously to where you want to take those people as leaders, which means it's not just about the organizational vision, but about their own journeys, right? Do your bit for their own journeys. Work with them, figure that out, and build towards something that's sustainable for them, for you, and for the organization, which really means reinforcing the whole thing with what the organization is set out to do, not doing it separately. This is what I would really talk about.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that, Ajit. And I think a beautiful integration of both aspects in that sense. So thank you. Kamudi, would you like to go next? I see you're unmuted.
Sure. Sure. Two things I would, number one, managing meetings. When you're having a meeting, always share the agenda in advance and always send out minutes after the meeting because it ensures that people come in prepared with a diverse set of ideas to the meeting. It shows that as a leader, you are welcoming of all inputs and you don't miss the people who were not in the room for whatever reason. They still are abreast with the meeting. It's not left up to chance to carry them along in the decision. So that's one practical tip. The second one is, I've seen particularly in organizations where there are multiple levels of hierarchy, there is a tendency to CC folks or seniors or managers on emails. And I think it can get very threatening to folks at a ground level. Like when I have a conversation, they say that, oh, why was my manager cc'd, or I was doing the thing. So I think if we can just keep that tendency in check, that, if you want to FYI, not to do it in a threatening manner. I think these are two very practical things that can, sort of in the micro help create the psychological safety.
Thank you for those wisdom bombs, like I call them thus far. Can't wait to hear what the others have to share. Pratap, I see you're unmuted as well. Would you like to go in next?
I think at times leaders can come across unknowingly as I know it all, being there, done it kind of an approach, which can become an impediment itself in creating belongingness in their team. So one tactic I would recommend is there would be certain milestones in terms of project achievements or certain phases of the work that you are doing. Have the opportunity to reflect. It can be about good, bad, ugly. Set the tone by reflecting and come across as being vulnerable. That there are mistakes that have been committed, and one is capable of committing mistakes also, right? And then the tone sort of helps everyone else to chime in. And if you do it genuinely and consistently, that's a good direction that you are heading. Second is be genuinely interested in other people. When you're working with the team, the genuinity is identified after a point of time. Those are not conversations just for the work, but there is interest in understanding the other person who is part of the team.
Thank you so much, Pratap. Very, very meaningful insights and takeaways there. Thank you. Arpita, could we bring you in here?
So, two practical things that could help foster inclusion at work. One, I think I'll get a little tactical. How we converge in meetings or conversation, the tactile aspect of it. If it is a diverse team on introversion, extroversion, then the format of the meeting, whether it's in person, virtual, when virtual, whether it is off camera, on camera. When on camera, is it well put together or is it casual? Some of those pieces, and helping people feel that however I should, if that is the norm, then it's okay for me to show up, such that it's like setting the tone, if you will, of the conversations. And second, when in meetings, ensuring, and I go back to one of the points that's very close to my heart, ensuring that the quietest person in the room has a voice, whether articulated one or otherwise. So asking questions to not maybe at the end to say that, oh, you didn't speak, but at very many times ensuring that as a leader, you're a facilitator, not the person who's saying this is what needs to be done. We've seen often that makes people feel that I can talk and there's no definitive, too bad consequence or too good either, right? So that's one. And essentially the way we converge and communicate and conduct conversations makes inclusion. Second, I kind of something that's helped me a lot and I think works long way with teams is just working with each team member. We don't have very, very large teams in most of our world experiences. The ones that we work closely with as to what they aspire for and how much of it can we make happen through our roles and their next few years at work, right? If we are enabling them to grow, they will feel belonged and they will feel that they fit in. So yeah, those two things, working through their career aspirations very intentionally. And then second, making the day-to-day more, if you will, included.
Thank you so very much. And that brings us to the next segment, which is an absolutely fun segment for which I'm going to invite Vaishnavi to come in. And we're going to spotlight each one of you. I trust Vaishnavi to kind of bring her own spin to this segment. This is the rapid fire round. And no, there are no hampers like most of the coveted talk shows. But yes, there's gratitude for each and every one of you. So over to you, Vaishnavi, to walk us through the rapid fire, and good luck to all of you all who are in the hot seat for this one.
Thanks, Diksha. So what we'll do is, we have a set of 10 questions. I'll pose each question and then possibly what we'll do is we'll go in alphabetical order if that's fine, and then reverse alphabetical order. So that each time, I kind of spin the order. No one person has to start every time, right? We'll try to be inclusive. Yeah. So I'll just begin. One word to describe what inclusive belonging means to you in the workplace. So we'll start alphabetical order.
It's like being in a warm embrace all the time.
Lovely. Arpita?
Peace.
Comedy.
Acceptance.
Pratap?
No facade.
The next question, what's the biggest misconception about creating psychological safety for diverse teams? This time we'll start with Pratap and then close with Ajit.
Misconception can be around hesitation in sharing a critical view, and that the critical view might have certain impact on certain people.
I think misconception will be that one size will fit all. Tendency to broad brush things.
Arpita,
That it can't be done.
That it applies to others and not to me.
name one behavior leaders should demonstrate to foster inclusion and build trust. We'll start with you, Ajit.
I think unconditional acceptance.
Share more of their uh, infirmities and authentically.
Stop demanding alignment.
Transparency.
Yeah, I think this is something we discussed. What's one practical tip for leaders to show they're listening to their entire team, including quieter voices?
I would say the leader can reflect and say how many times have they really modified their approach after communicating to the team, because it's not just listening, it's rather incorporating the actions.
I think for me, it's ability to flex their own behavior, their own styles, and also listen to what's not being spoken. So if you call for a meeting and people don't come or they're too quiet, so also read the non-verbal cues.
I think tactically turn the video on, put the mobile off, and just be there.
Leaders who show up as they are more likely to sort of really drive that.
Thank you. Thank you for those perspectives. In one sentence, how does a sense of inclusion and belonging impact performance?
I think it's the bedrock of sustained performance.
It unlocks creativity.
It's transformative.
The willingness to go upstream is unleashed.
This is my favorite question. A book, article, or a resource. It could even be a TED talk that changed your perspective on inclusive leadership and psychological safety.
I'll recommend something which is very concise. 1 Minute Manager by Ken Blanchard. Easier to read, quick to incorporate.
For me, it's a book called How Women Rise by Marshall Goldsmith. I think it's truly epic and it aided me in my own journey as well.
For me, it's one related and the other unrelated. One is Start with the Why by Simon Sinek, and the other one is Lean In, which is the other one.
I'll talk about a management book and a non-management book. So the First Break All the Rules by Marcus Buckingham and Kurt Kaufman, I think is probably the book to, for all managers. And the non-management book that I recently read is Ashwin's autobiography, I Have the Streets. There are huge elements of inclusion or lack of it at different points in time in his own trajectory and what happens around him. And as I was preparing for this discussion, I was constantly going back to a lot of instances from that book. So I would strongly recommend it. It's of course very topical also right now, as something that had a lot of messages.
Thank you. So I just conclude with one last question. In one word, what's the future of inclusion and psychological safety in the workplace? And
I think it's quite bright, and rightly so.
I think it'll be far more, I completely concur with Ajit, far brighter than it ever has been and far more consequential. I do truly believe that a lot of leadership, growth, incentives, positions will come from leaders that are inclusive. It'll be far more metricized than it ever has been.
I think it will be imperative. Organizations that are not able to bring the change will cease to be relevant to the new generations.
I think it's a future where everyone adopts win-win is the way going forward. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. Everyone came together.
great. Thank you so much, everyone, for those insightful responses and really good book suggestions, which I'm looking forward to getting back to.
Thank you so much. On that very hopeful note, I think we've come to the end of this beautiful conversation. Once again, thank you each and every one of you in this room today for making the time. And I always say this, when people around me, people close to me ask, what is it that you want as a gift on your special day? I said nothing, just the time, because I think time has become such a scarce resource in our lives. So thank you to each and every one of you for making time to amplifying the voice on subjects and conversations like these. I am a very strong believer of the fact that we may not even collectively have all the answers, but given we're all asking the right questions, is just showing our investment and our commitment to the cause